Aloha, everyone. My name is Lindsay, and I work out at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology with Rob Tonin. That's my PhD advisor. So I thought that I would just give everyone an overview of some of the ways that I go about my work. I'm unique among grad students in that I don't have a lot of field work, and I'm always on the computer. So when people ask what I do, it's kind of hard to explain. I'm always on the computer. What exactly am I doing? So this is what I'm doing. I'm looking at data that's already been collected through different mechanisms. So first, a question for everyone. How much of the ocean has been mapped? Just yell out some numbers. Okay, 2%? 5, 1? Okay.
That percentage three-dimensional.
Don't make this too complicated. It's, it's the end of the week. Okay. So you're all wrong. The answer is 100%, okay? So who knew, right? So actually, it's 100% at 5-kilometer resolution. So that's a resolution. So just as an example, here's a 5-kilometer resolution image. So we can't really tell what's going on in this picture. We have some brown and green kind of in the middle and some blue in the corner. But it's 5-kilometer resolution, it's all there, we just can't see what's going on. So when we say it's been mapped at 100% 5-kilometer resolution, it means some things, but we can improve on that. So the way that we've done this, we do have a whole global map of the seafloor at 5-kilometer resolution, is we've collected these data through the use of satellites. So some of these satellites are ventures that have been employed by NOAA and NASA, as well as some European space agencies. So what they're doing with these satellites is they're looking at water vapor, at ocean topography. They're looking at the refraction of some of their lasers on the sea surface. And from that, they can make some rough map of the seafloor. So this is an example of that map. So this is out of UCSD in California. So you can see this is not a very high resolution map, but you can tell there are some areas with seamounts. We can see areas with some major fault lines, and this gives us kind of a general picture of the seafloor, right? So that's our 5-kilometer resolution. Now, I'm kind of dissing the 5-kilometer resolution, but that's what we have now, whereas only 20 years ago, the best that we had was 20-kilometer resolution, which is a lot worse. So we've made great strides in just a couple of decades. Okay, so let's say moderate resolution, so like 100-meter resolution. We've actually mapped about 10% of the seafloor, so that's probably where your guesses of something like 5% have come from. So when we're talking about moderate resolution, it's an image where we can kind of start to see, okay, this image over here, it kind of looks like there's some land, there's some ocean to the side. It's a moderate resolution image, but it's not that great. We wouldn't want to hang that on our wall or anything, but it's a little bit better. So the way that we get this moderate resolution image is through multi-beam bathymetry. So what that looks like is we have these ships like the Okeanos Explorer. If you guys have heard of that, that's an operation conducted by NOAA. So this ship passes over certain track lines and sends sonar to the seafloor. And depending on the strength and the speed of the beam that returns, they can tell how deep the seafloor is, as well as the hardness. So when I say hardness, I mean, are they looking at rock? Are they looking at a sandy bed? Is there a shelf that they're passing over? That kind of thing. So this is an example of a multi-beam backscatter bathymetry image. So does this blob in the middle look like anything to anybody? To me. But if we zoom in a little closer, it's starting to look a little more familiar, right? So this is actually an example of one of the missions that was conducted by one of the labs that I work with, Hawaii Undersea Research Lab. So what they did is they went out and they mapped some of the seafloor, and through that they discovered some of these sunken I-400s. So those are submarine aircraft carriers from World War II that were built by the Japanese. They were sunk by US soldiers following the end of World War II to avoid allowing that technology to get into the hands of the Soviets. These vessels, they didn't actually keep coordinate data. So it's not very coordinate data. That's why it's really useful to have this multi-beam backscatter imagery that can identify these little blobs on the seafloor. We go down there and look, with a submersible and identified that this was an I-400 by some particular characteristics regarding the makeup of the deck as well as the existence of these torpedo tubes. So that's pretty cool. Additionally, that's how that happens to be the way that they found the Titanic. So they didn't just make a good guess and go down and find it, beam backscatter bathymetry to find the Titanic as well. So, okay, so we've progressed from 20-kilometer resolution to 5-kilometer, all the way down to 100-meter. So 100-meter, it's pretty good. It's getting better. But what about really, really high resolution? So less than 100-meter, meaning maybe 5-meter, maybe 1-meter resolution. So right now, we have less than 1% of the seafloor mapped at less than 100-meter resolution. So a 1-meter resolution image, for example, now we can see this is clearly Diamond Head. We can see shadows on the side of the mountain. We can see the waves in the ocean. So this is a really high quality image. Equivalent to only about 6 of the Big Island, so about 26,000 square miles, so not that much. And the way that we do this is we send submersibles down to the seafloor. So these are just some of the examples of the submersible images that I work with. So in the top corner of some deep water corals here, we have a cornet fish. We have some invasive algae. There's a crown of thorns. And then there's some black coral over here. So we can look at all sorts of things, different weird deep water communities. We can look at the invasion of different species that were introduced by boat traffic to the islands. And we can look for things that are economically valuable to us. One of the projects that I'm working on now as a result of my funding through Sea Grant is a distribution map of Auvergnevillea. So Auvergnevillea is this nasty type of algae. It's actually this, and you guys might have seen it if you know the work that Malama Monolua does. It's actually controlling this invasive algae, and it's spread over the coral reefs in the shallow zone. So I'm using a combination of imagery derived from satellites and from submersibles and from ship surveys, and I'm combining all this data into a data set where I have images of Auvergnevillea, both present and absent in an area, and I'm looking at environmental characteristics. So I'm looking for patterns. So where do we see Auvergnevillea? Like what depth ranges? Do we see it on a sandy bottom? Does it grow on rocks? Here is an image of Auvergnevillea. It's this nasty olive green stuff over here, and it's encroaching on this native Eudodia seabed. And so that's something that's interesting and important to management agencies, because we want to know the spread of this stuff. Is it maybe threatening our native species? And so when I complete this project, I'm going to have a map that looks something like this. So we've never surveyed the majority of this coastline at the depth ranges that I'm considering. But when I complete the project, I'll have this heat map where I can say, okay, well, there's maybe a high probability of Auvergnevillea spreading over in these areas with the warm colors, and there's less of a probability in these areas with the cool colors. And that can guide management decisions where we can focus our resources to combat the spread of this invasive. Okay, and with that, I'll hand it over to Marcus. Thank you, everybody. It's actually Flo. Sure.
Aloha, I'm Flo La Valle. I'm going to stand here because I'm vertically challenged and I need to be by the mic, I hear. So I'm a PhD student in the Marine Biology graduate program at UH, and I'm in Craig Nelson's lab, but this work is under Joanna Filippov, who is a faculty member in the education department at UH. So today I'm going to be talking about our project in Hawaii's Intertidal. I'm the program manager for this project, for short. So first, to clear up some misconceptions, OPIHI with the Okina is the limpet that lives in the intertidal, and maybe you've eaten it before. And OPIHI in all caps is an acronym for our program. And our program is designed to look at rocky intertidal shores in Hawaii and see how they're changing over time. And the intertidal is important because it hosts a wide variety of different organisms, different limu or algae, and different invertebrates. And we use these in different cultural practices for food, for medicine, and for jewelry. And even though it's really important, it's very vulnerable to human threats because it's really close to the land. So anything from nutrient inputs from groundwater to surface water that are enriched in nutrients from, say, cesspools or sewage, to climate change. So for example, as sea levels rise, the intertidal creatures are not going to be able to go anywhere. Yeah.
What is that species?
This is Hypnea, Hypnea fusiformis. It's an invasive species. Yeah. And even though it's really important, our intertidal here in Hawaii is really understudied for many reasons. First, most people here study coral reefs. And that's cool. I love coral reefs too. But another reason is because we have a small tidal range. So we only have a difference of about 1 meter between low tide and high tide. And so just to give you perspective, in California, the difference is about 3 meters. And also, our tidal window is really small. So when the intertidal is exposed at low tide, it's only exposed for a couple of hours. So in order to study this environment, we need a lot of people doing research at the same time. And that's where OPIHI comes into play. OPIHI is 2 sister projects. One is a teacher professional development that is run statewide as citizen science. And one is an internship based on Oahu with UH undergrads. And they're different, but they have similar scientific and educational goals. So these are things like increasing scientific literacy and connection to place by doing authentic research in the intertidal. So today I'm going to focus on the undergraduate component because those are the people I work with the most. We run a year-long internship with the undergrads. We recruit about 14 with various different backgrounds and levels of knowledge. And in the fall, I run a semi-structured course. I show them how to do surveys. We get wet a lot. And the collaborating scientists come in and give presentations on their research. And then we divvy them up into small groups and have them work with the collaborating scientists on that research. So they write proposals for questions that they're interested in. And in the spring, they take credits, research credits with their home department, and they do the field work and the lab work for all of their experiment. Then they also give reports to us. They present to the community members within which they did their field work, and they help teachers on their field trips. And this structure, this nested structure, allows for us to divvy up the responsibilities of mentoring amongst a big group of people. So not just me and the other facilitators, but collaborating scientists, their home departments, and the rest of the organizations that we work with. Okay, so I don't have that much time to go into depth in any of these, but hopefully this will give you an idea of the kind of work that the students do. So in EVA, the students worked with Erin Cox and Heather Spalding on looking at the algal communities out there. And they had data that dated back to the early 90s. And if you look at the pie chart on the left, you can see each one of those colors represents a different algae species, algal species. And you can see that there were a lot of them, a lot of diversity out there. And now we did the same exact protocol, same exact place, and you see that leather mudweed, or Avernvelia, as Lindsay was saying before, has taken over that spot. So Lindsay's maps hopefully will help us know where the Avernvelia is going to take over next. They also worked with Kanoe Morishige, who is a PhD student in marine biology. Her work is really about empowering communities to monitor their own natural resources by looking at population densities of hokoke, which is the helmet urchin, as well as their actual OPIHI limpet populations. And by doing this, the communities will know when to harvest and how much to harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The population density. Where is the population?
That's a good question. And I don't know that I can say because this is not my research and it's kind of private information for that community. So, you know, you imagine if you were sitting on a pot of gold, you probably wouldn't want to say where it is, yeah? And then I was lucky enough to also have a group of undergrads, and my work is in Honolulu Bay, which you hopefully all know really well. And this is Black Point. And that little dot is where groundwater comes out of. So my work is looking at groundwater and how it affects algal communities. So I had my students do really fine-scale benthic surveys, so about 20 meters apart. And that's very fine scale. So this is a accumulation of maybe like 200 quadrats, 200 points. And with this data, we can make maps, kind of like Lindsay. And on the left, you see the calcifying algae, and the darker the green, the more calcifying algae there is. So you see that it doesn't like the groundwater. And that's really cool to me because I've always thought that the groundwater made it really hard for calcifying algae to calcify. And so now I get to look at it and see it visually for myself. And we also get to measure the distance between the groundwater and where the calcification is actually happening. So that's cool to me. And then on the right, we see the cover of Terracladiella, which is a native small red alga. And this is cool for different reasons. Well, first of all, it likes the groundwater. And second, Terracladiella used to be kind of rare in Hawaii. And now we see it a lot more. And it likes groundwater. Okay, so our current students are working in Waikīkī. This is the natatorium. Kaimana's Beach is to the right of it. And 50 years ago, a biologist named Max Doty did the study. He looked at all the limu or algae out there, and he saw that most of it, a lot of it offshore, was limu kala or sargassum, which is the picture on the top. Let's see if I can move it. And now we know that Waikīkī has changed a lot in the past 50 years. Maybe some of you remember that. I'd love to talk story. But now it's mostly Acanthophoros piscifera, which is the prickly seaweed, and Gracilaria salicornia, or gorilla ogo. And both of those are invasives here in Hawaii. Okay, and then our teachers, we teach them how to do surveys in the Intertidal. We go to the different neighboring islands and we teach them how to do the surveys the way that we do them. And then they take their students out and do the same thing. And so we get all of this great data from all over the state. And the teachers on Oahu are especially lucky because they get the help of our undergrads. And so they go out there and help them with the field trips. And this is called longitudinal assessment, which is really just a fancy way to say we're comparing this from data that we had from 10 years ago. So OPIHI was run 10 years ago as well, much in the same way. So we have data from the yellow points from 10 years ago. So now we're looking at how these sites have changed in the past 10 years. And so I like to call this the OPIHI pipeline. This is one of our undergrads helping out at a high school field trip. And I think it's a win-win-win. I think it's a win for the teachers because they get someone to wrangle their students and to make sure that the protocol is being done appropriately. The undergrad wins because they get to show off all of the great skills that they've learned over the year. And the high school or middle school students win because they see an expert or a role model that is just a few years older than them. So hopefully that inspires them scientists one day, or at least to engage in science. Okay, so we had people who were there 10 years ago doing these field trips. and they also were here these past couple of years. So I haven't worked up the data yet, but from their observations, we have these hunches. So we see a decrease in Hypnea muciformis from one of the very first slides, and alba, that's the green lettuce-looking algae. And then we see increases in Pteroclidiella, that small red alga, and Abrevilla amadelpha, that leather mudweed that Lindsay was talking about. So this project has both scientific and educational goals. So as part of the educational research, we interview everyone, all the teachers, all their students, and our undergrads. So I picked some quotes from the undergrad interviews and leave you with them. I just wanted to say that most of our students went on in science-related careers, and some didn't, which is totally fine, as long as they're good ecology ambassadors. And I want to thank the rest of the team, especially Joanna Filippov, who's really the mastermind behind all of this. Vanessa Serafin is a co-PI on this. She lives in Hawaii. And Jessica Shaker was a grad student on the teacher professional development end of things. Caroline was one of our interns from the first cohort, and we liked her so much that we hired her. And now she's moved on to a career with the STEM Academy. So, thank you.
You have the director of market airbox.
Yes. So we did when it was OPIHI Olympic, but when it's just OPIHI, the acronym, it's an acronym. It's not OPIHI Olympic anymore. You know what I mean? Thank you, though.
Do you want to talk to this? We can talk in this. Let's just kind of stick around this.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Aloha, I'm Marcus Peng, and I will be talking about an update that we are doing to a previous study that talked about the economic impact of what would happen if Waikīkī Beach eroded completely away. And then we'll talk about also our forthcoming work on what we're planning next. So back in 2008, there was a report commissioned by the Waikīkī Beach Special Improvement District Association, where the consultant group, Hospitality Advisors, did a report talking about, let's assume for a moment that the entire beach erodes. What would be the sort of loss to the state in terms of dollars? So what happened in that study was there was some state government data from the Hawaii Tourism Association. There was some hotel data purchased from the STR group. And there was also another study done of just visitors on the ground. So they talked to people in front of hotels, asking them, what would you do if there was no beach? Would you still come back? So we did an update with updated 2016 data, and from our estimate, there would be roughly $2.2 billion lost in 2007 dollars. So basically, accounting for inflation, roughly a similar amount of money would be lost. This is lost spending, accommodations, in that sense. So we calculate basically the hotel revenue that would be lost in the situation. And we also looked at other visitor spending. So for example, is there some shopping that would be, that people won't be doing? Is there restaurant meals that people no longer purchase? And the key assumption of the study, both back in 2008 and in our 2016 update, hinges on this. So there was a survey. This is the survey that I talked about earlier. This was conducted and here we see both westbound. So this is your U.S. tourists, right, from other parts of the U.S., and also Japanese tourists, because these two groups are the vast majority of all tourists. So as you can see here, the behavior is quite different. roughly 60% of U.S. tourists will no longer stay in Waikiki should all the beach disappear, but only a minority of Japanese tourists would behave in the same way. So if we take a look at this graph here, the blue bar is the original report, and the red is what's changed over time. So as we can see here, there are many more visitors than before, some roughly 19%. And people are also spending more on hotels, so another 15%. But as a result, there's less money going, there's less money being spent. So for example, people are spending less per day, less on non-hotel costs. But roughly, overall, if we look on the very right, it's roughly the same amount of dollars that would be lost should there be no more beach. And that's the estimate here. So over time, many things has happened, of course. But one trend that's consistent is that visitation has gone up. There has been more and more visitors over time. So if you take a look here, there's a bit of a dip. This is right after the recession in 2008, but it's recovered. It's more than recovers. Now there are plenty more people visiting. And we can also see here, statewide visitors has continued to increase, as has visitors here on Oahu. And let's go back to this assumption for a second. Nowadays, we are getting more and more visitors from other parts of Asia as well, which we assume to behave more similar to Japanese tourists. That is, they do not necessarily leave the beach should it be eroded. And so now we can also see visitor spending trends. And this is, so we had this a little earlier where we noticed visitors are going up, but the per person per day spending is going down. So, oh, there we go. Okay, so in particular, we can see, if we look at the graph on the right here, that line that has decreased sharply, these would be visitors from Japan. And people in general are spending less per day. So in this analysis, we included things like hotel revenue, food and beverage spending, other hotel revenue, activity spending, and then we also looked at the tax impact, both in the GET and also the transient accommodation tax. And then a few minor things that has changed are a lot of the hotels have moved up in categories as room rates has gone up over time. So there's a lot of numbers here, but I'll just point out some of the important things. The idea is that we're trying to show is that visitation has gone up a great deal over time, steadily. And then we also took a look at what tax impacts there would be. So this would be with the both the transient accommodation and GET taxes. And then we looked at lost tax revenue that would result from people no longer returning to the to Waikiki because the beach might have been eroded. So all of this is leading up to phase 2 of this project, which I would say is far more important, because up to this point we've been updating a report with current day figures. But going forward, we are attempting to value Waikiki's shoreline as a whole. What we see today in the lost revenue is only a small portion, right, of the rest of the value of Waikiki. There is a great deal of value in recreation. There's some ecological value. A lot of this is not included in some of the market transactions that we see today. So the idea is that we would like to value a lot more uses other than just dollars and cents that are currently being spent on hotel rooms. And going forward with our study, we are looking at not just visitors, but also residents as well. But we are looking at how people value on-site beach facilities, the width and the length of the beach, and also crowdedness. The idea is that by gathering data such as this, we would be informing any future either renourishment or improvements to Waikīkī Beach that the state would be conducting. So we basically looked at different designs to go about this. And this sort of study has been done across the United States and also elsewhere in the world, where we are able to get some sort of value for uses of the beach that are not currently found in, well, I shouldn't say not currently found. We are able to get values for uses of the beach that are not currently shown in the market because there are no transactions. So for example, you might enjoy swimming early in the morning at the beach, but there is no admission fee, right? So we're doing work on attempting to capture some of that value. And by making use of attendance data, we will be carrying out this survey all throughout Waikīkī Beach. And people like myself will be conducting in-person interviews to collect further data on this topic. Thank you.
Let's give our 3 Sea Grant graduate trainees a round of applause. Thank you. So what we'll do now is we'll have you guys come up front, Lindsay, Flo, Marcus. And now we can entertain questions from the audience. Yes.
Could you put up the picture of OPIHI?
Yeah, sure.
Are they wearing shoes?
They are wearing shoes. Yeah, safety is very important.
Oh, you gotta come and use the mic.
The survey with people on the Intertidal.
Yeah.
It's going to cause some damage.
Yeah, that's
Why
a.
are they going barefoot?
So, you know how lava rock is really sharp? If we went, if we went barefoot, and actually people have tried and regretted it. But that's a great point. Trampling is totally an impact that we have on the environment. And actually that student, this is a great question, because that student did a study on how much we rip off with our shoes. And it's a good amount. So these are things we have to keep in mind. When we do science, we have an impact too.
I'm glad they're all thin.
Sorry?
I said, I'm glad they're all thin, low in weight.
Yes, maybe that helps. Yes. So when it's all in capitals, it just means the program. So we're not talking about the animal. And that's like a really big confusing thing for people, obviously. We see that today. When it's the diacritical mark, that means it's the animal itself. So OPIHI, no, this is like an acronym for our project in Hawaii's Intertidal. I know that's a great question. It is a little confusing, yeah. But now it's gonna become our persona, so it'll be hard to change.
Questions?
Probably elevate.
Yeah, and because of OPIHI live in the Intertidal, so yeah. Mm-hmm. It should have.
I have no idea. Explain to me what. I know what the general excise tax is. What is the transient accommodation tax? VAT. What is that?
This is
You have to use the mic and stand next to the Yeti.
okay. This is the hotel tax, right? That's levied on all hotels. So it used to be, it used to be a much lower amount, but Back in 2015, it was 7.25% on the hotel rate. It's gone up to 8.25 for 2016, and it's gone up to 9.25 in 2017, and is supposedly going up again.
Taxes only put on people that, the hotels, that's only the hotels pay this tax.
They charge the hotels, but what happens in reality is the hotels stick it on the bill, right? So let's say, I'm there for a night, 9.25% of the bill is the tax, basically. Yeah.
Is that any impact on the Waikīkī economy?
People
worry about that, visitors?
It's tax collected by the state, right? So if the tax goes up, so think about it intuitively, right? If the tax is very high, then if someone is going on vacation, they might say, "Oh, that's somewhat unpleasant," right? But that sort of depends on the individual, of course.
When the hotels publish their room rates, is that included in that price?
No. The tax is always on
They
top.
don't know that until they get it.
Let's say when someone tries to book the hotel online, all the taxes do show up though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before you check out, it does show up, but it's still sort of unpleasant to see at times. But, yeah.
Okay, other questions for our speakers tonight? Another one, yes, please.
Give me an idea of the resolution. I don't know what resolution is, but give me an idea of the definition or how the difference between high resolution and low resolution. How is it accomplished, and what's the definition of it?
So the question was regarding how to define resolution and how we would get from a high to a low resolution or vice versa. So if you think about a satellite orbiting the Earth, it's going to send a ping down and do whatever it does, its calculations, to get some measurement, whether it's a measurement of cloud cover or maybe looking at characteristics that determine what the seafloor looks like at that given time, right? So it's going to send that ping down, but it's not going to be able to ping at the speed that we would need to make a high resolution photo. So we would need many pings, many dots across an area, because we'd have a measurement here. So we could really clearly say, okay, this area of the room has, here's a microphone and a podium, here's the floor, here's a table. We could easily see that. If we just had one ping in this room, we could kind of see it's a brown room, but that's pretty much all that we could say. So when we have multiple measurements at very close intervals, that's when we have our high resolution images. And that's just generally better for everybody, for scientific inference, for what you post online on Facebook. Everybody wants high resolution. So that's always going to be better. Yeah.
What kind of technology do you actually get the really high resolution? Remember this with the bottom of the boat, or? Yeah,
so the question was, what kind of technology are we using to get those really high resolution, really good images? So we use multiple types of technology. So I don't want to mischaracterize the work that the boats at NOAA do and say that they only source moderate resolution data. They actually do play a part in getting us high resolution data. So they are sending sonar signals down to the seafloor and getting pings back, and they're able to see even individual ripples in the sand. It's incredible. However, they're limited by that because they only get the high resolution for the track that the ship has traveled. And you can imagine if you're sending a lot of signals down, you're going to have to go really slow so you can get lots of pings on the seafloor as you go. And then you're going to have to turn around and come back and just have sort of a ribbon style pattern of surveying to get that really high resolution imagery. So that's why we don't have a lot surveyed by ships. One thing that I do is I look at, so those images that I showed of algae and corals on the seafloor, that contributes to our understanding of what a high resolution image of a reef would look like, because that's a submersible that's traveling. Sometimes it's manned, sometimes it's not, traveling along a seafloor. Again, it's just that track that the submersible goes, but we can get those really fine close-ups from the cameras on the submersible. Sometimes we can even take samples. So it's all sort of this synthesis of data that's more broad, but then we can combine it with data that's more specific and precise, and then we can out, okay, this area in this part of the island kind of looks like this area. We've only surveyed this one in the south, but it looks a lot like what's in the north. So we can sort of expect that what's in the north looks like what's in the south, that kind of thing.
The one point. There's a reason you don't have high resolution of everything. You don't have enough storage capacity to collect all the data.
Oh, okay. So the question was, do we have enough storage capacity? Is that a limiting factor in collecting the high resolution data? So that's actually not a limiting factor at all. We have amazing capabilities for storing massive amounts of data in really small spaces. The problem is more, it's very expensive to send a ship out and have them survey over and over and over. I think I was actually on one of these ships at one point, and they calculated how long it would take. It would take over 200 years to survey the ocean with the technology that we have today in that format. So it's not really feasible right now with the money situation that goes into that and the timing. Yes?
I think you started off by saying, take a guess of what percentage of the ocean floor has been surveyed in each.
Yes.
And I think the answer was 100%.
Yes.
At 5 kilometer resolution.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask, when do you think that 5 kilometer resolution was completed? What year?
I think it was 2014 was when UCSD came out with that.
Okay, now, high resolution, if that has been completed, maybe I don't know, lower percentage or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I own a book, $25, or an atlas book.
Oh.
It's very difficult
Yeah.
to figure out. And it has a ocean floor all over the world. And I don't know what year my book is, but it's what, many, many years ago. So when do you think those pictures were taken?
You know, I don't know when all the pictures of all the seafloor have been taken. I know satellites have been up there for quite a while, but I know that there's been some artist's liberty, let's say, with some of the areas that are lower resolution, where we think we can see a seamount, for example. They can translate that into illustrations in a way that might not translate to reality. Yeah. Yeah.
Students that you're working with, partly or maybe high school.
Oh, so for the undergraduate program, it's all undergrads from the whole UH system, so also the community colleges. Mm-hmm. But the teachers are, they teach middle school and high school. Yeah.